There comes a moment in the life of every Sophia Empath when something inside them quietly dies, not their kindness, not their compassion, not even their ability to love. Something far more dangerous, the belief that understanding people is enough to protect them from being hurt. For years, the Sophia Empath believes pain can be prevented through awareness. If they understand someone's wounds, they can avoid becoming one. If they love deeply enough, people will eventually love honestly in return. If they remain patient, others will eventually become self-aware. But reality has a different lesson. Carl Jung believed that the greatest psychological suffering comes from refusing to see reality as it is. Instead, we cling to the version we desperately wish were true. The Sophia Empath learns this lesson slowly, through repeated disappointments, repeated betrayals, repeated moments where actions quietly destroy everything words promised. At first, every heartbreak feels personal. Every rejection feels like failure. Every betrayal feels like proof that they were not enough. Until something unexpected begins happening. The pain stops asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and starts asking, "Why did I keep believing someone who repeatedly showed me who they were?" That question changes everything. Because for the first time, the Sophia Empath stops studying other people's behavior and begins studying their own unconscious patterns. The need to rescue, the need to understand, the need to earn love through endless patience. One by one, those patterns begin collapsing. People often believe healing means becoming emotionally stronger. But psychological healing begins somewhere much darker. It begins when illusion finally becomes more painful than truth. The Sophia Empath realizes they were never hurt simply because people were dishonest. They were hurt because hope kept overriding evidence, kindness kept overriding boundaries, potential kept overriding reality, and reality always waits patiently. Because reality never argues. It simply repeats itself until someone is finally willing to see it. That moment marks the beginning of a transformation most people never recognize. Not because the Sophia Empath becomes harder to hurt, because they stop participating in the unconscious patterns that kept creating the same pain. And once that process begins, there is no returning to the person they used to be. The strange thing about pain is that it changes its purpose over time. At first, pain feels like punishment, something inflicted upon you by someone else, a betrayal, a rejection, a broken promise. The Sophia Empath carries each wound carefully, turning it over endlessly, searching for meaning, searching for explanations, searching for the one detail that might make the suffering easier to understand. Because empathy naturally believes that understanding creates safety. If you understand enough, you won't be hurt again. But Carl Jung understood something far more disturbing. Awareness does not protect you from pain. It protects you from repeating it. There is a difference, a profound difference. The Sophia Empath slowly begins noticing a pattern. The faces change, the names change, the stories change, but the emotional ending always feels strangely familiar. The same disappointment, the same exhaustion, the same feeling of giving more than they received. That is when an uncomfortable realization appears. Perhaps the problem was never choosing the wrong people. Perhaps the problem was repeatedly ignoring the same patterns. The late-night apology followed by the same behavior. The promise of change followed by the same disrespect. The affection that appeared only when access was threatened. Different people, same pattern. People reveal themselves through repetition, not through potential, not through intentions. Repetition. The Sophia Empath finally begins believing what they repeatedly see, instead of what they desperately hope will happen. That single shift changes everything, because hope without awareness quietly becomes self-deception. Kindness without boundaries quietly teaches people how to use you, and forgiveness without change quietly teaches people that consequences will never arrive. For years, the Sophia Empath confused compassion with responsibility. They believed another person's healing somehow depended on their patience, their loyalty, their willingness to stay. But healing is never borrowed. It is chosen. No amount of love can force another person to confront the parts of themselves they are determined to avoid. The moment the Sophia Empath accepts that truth, something inside them becomes unexpectedly calm. Not because people suddenly become better, because expectations finally become realistic, and realistic expectations rarely create unnecessary suffering. For the first time, the Sophia Empath stops asking, "How do I stop people from hurting me?" and starts asking something far more powerful. Why would I continue giving access to someone who repeatedly chooses to hurt me? That question marks the beginning of a life where pain no longer decides who gets to stay. And that is when something unexpected happens. The Sophia Empath stops fearing pain, not because life suddenly becomes easier, because pain is no longer mysterious, it becomes predictable. Carl Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious continues directing your life until it becomes conscious. The Sophia Empath finally understands what that means. For years, they believed the greatest danger came from manipulative people, from narcissists, from betrayal, from deception. But eventually, they discover something even more unsettling. The greatest danger was never the people who hurt them. It was the unconscious part of themselves that kept giving those people another opportunity. That realization feels brutal, because it removes the last illusion. There is nobody left to blame completely, not because others are innocent, but because awareness demands responsibility. The Sophia Empath begins observing themselves with the same honesty they once reserved for everyone else. The need to be needed, the fear of letting go, the quiet belief that enough love could transform someone who refused to transform themselves. One by one, those beliefs begin collapsing. People often mistake this stage for emotional coldness. It isn't, it is emotional accuracy. The empath no longer sees people through potential. They see them through patterns, and patterns rarely lie. The person who apologizes only after consequences appear. The person who disappears whenever accountability arrives. The person who returns only when they need comfort. Different stories, same behavior. The Sophia Empath no longer argues with reality, because reality never needed convincing. It only needed acceptance. That is why something remarkable begins happening. The same manipulation no longer works. The same guilt no longer works. The same emotional chaos no longer works. Not because the world changed, because the empath finally did. People don't always lose power over you through confrontation. Sometimes, they lose power the moment you stop needing them to become someone they have repeatedly chosen not to be. That realization creates an unfamiliar feeling, peace. Not the peace that comes from perfect relationships, the peace that comes from no longer fighting obvious truths. And once that peace appears, the Sophia Empath discovers something they never believed possible. The safest place in the world was never inside another person's promises. It was inside their own ability to finally believe what reality had been showing them all along. And then, the Sophia Empath realizes something that once felt impossible. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. For years, they believed forgiving someone meant allowing them to remain close. Believed compassion required another chance. Believed love demanded unlimited patience. But Carl Jung understood that psychological maturity is not measured by how often you forgive. It is measured by how clearly you see, and clear vision changes everything. The Sophia Empath begins recognizing a painful truth. Some people never apologize because they understand the damage they caused. They apologize because they fear losing access. The apology arrives. The tears arrive. The promises arrive. But the pattern remains untouched. Different words, same behavior. People reveal themselves through repetition. Not emotion, not intention. Repetition. That is why the disciplined Sophia Empath no longer listens only to what people say. They study what people consistently choose. The person who says they love you, but repeatedly ignores your boundaries. The person who says they respect you, but only when you agree with them. The person who says they have changed, but returns to the same emotional habits the moment life becomes uncomfortable. Different conversations, same unconscious cycle. The Sophia Empath no longer feels the need to interrupt that cycle because they finally understand something most people spend decades resisting. You cannot heal someone who is committed to protecting the very patterns destroying them. That responsibility was never yours. And the moment that burden disappears, something remarkable replaces it. Silence. Not the silence of loneliness, the silence of clarity. The exhausting need to explain fades away. The desperate need to be understood fades away. Even the fear of being misunderstood begins fading. Because truth no longer depends on agreement. Reality does not become false simply because someone refuses to accept it. The Sophia Empath finally trusts what they repeatedly observe, not what they desperately hope. People don't always hurt you because they are cruel. Sometimes they hurt you because they are unconscious. But unconsciousness does not erase consequences. It only explains them, and explanation is not permission. That realization changes every future relationship. Because from this point forward, the Sophia Empath stops asking whether someone deserves another chance. They begin asking a far more important question. Has this person given me any real reason to believe that tomorrow will be different from yesterday? And that single question quietly closes doors that endless hope once kept open. And eventually, the Sophia Empath reaches a place they once believed did not exist. A place where peace no longer depends on other people. For years, their emotional world rose and fell with someone else's choices. Someone replied. They felt secure. Someone disappeared. They felt abandoned. Someone changed. Their entire inner world changed with them. Without realizing it, they had handed the keys to their peace to people who had never learned how to protect their own. Carl Jung believed that psychological freedom begins when your inner world is no longer ruled by external events. The Sophia Empath finally begins living that truth, not because life becomes easier, because dependence quietly disappears. They stop depending on apologies, stop depending on closure, stop depending on explanations that never arrive, because they discover something painful. Closure is not always given. Sometimes it is accepted. That realization changes everything. The unanswered message loses its power. The silent treatment loses its power. The emotional withdrawal loses its power. Because power only survives where expectation survives. The Sophia Empath no longer expects unconscious people to suddenly become conscious. No longer expects honesty from those who survive through deception. No longer expects consistency from those who have spent years avoiding themselves. Different people, same acceptance, reality. People often believe strength means never feeling hurt again. But that is impossible. The disciplined Sophia Empath still feels pain, still feels grief, still feels disappointment. The difference is, those emotions no longer decide their future. Pain becomes a visitor, not a permanent resident, and that changes everything. Because when pain stops becoming your identity, it also stops becoming your prison. The Sophia Empath begins noticing something remarkable. The same situations that once shattered them now simply reveal people more clearly. Disrespect becomes information. Manipulation becomes information. Silence becomes information. Everything becomes information. Not a command, not a reason to abandon themselves, just information. And information is powerless unless you refuse to see it. That is why nothing and nobody can ever hurt the Sophia Empath in the same way again. Not because human beings stop lying, not because betrayal disappears, but because illusion no longer survives where awareness has taken its place. And once awareness becomes stronger than hope, the same wounds can never be created twice. And then, the Sophia Empath begins noticing something that once seemed invisible. Pain no longer attracts them. It reveals people. For years, they confused emotional intensity with emotional connection. The more difficult a relationship became, the more meaningful they believed it was. The more someone withdrew, the harder they fought to understand them. The more unpredictable someone became, the more determined they felt to stay. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mistakes familiarity for destiny. That is why people often repeat the same emotional story with different characters. The Sophia Empath finally breaks that illusion. They stop chasing emotional highs, stop mistaking anxiety for love, stop confusing emotional chaos with emotional depth. And suddenly, relationships become much simpler, not easier, clearer. The person who respects your boundaries stays. The person who only loved unlimited access leaves. The person who valued your peace adapts. The person who valued your availability complains. Different outcomes, same truth. People reveal what they truly wanted from you the moment you stop giving it automatically. That realization feels almost unbelievable, because the Sophia Empath finally understands something that years of heartbreak failed to teach them. Love should not require constant self-abandonment. Respect should not require endless explanations. Peace should not require permission. The moment those truths settle into the mind, fear quietly begins disappearing. Not because betrayal becomes impossible, because betrayal is no longer capable of destroying identity. The Sophia Empath finally knows who they are, even when someone else refuses to. People don't always break your heart by leaving. Sometimes, they try to break it by convincing you to betray yourself just to keep them. But that version of the Sophia Empath no longer exists. The one who begged for clarity, the one who chased closure, the one who confused patience with self-sacrifice. That person quietly disappeared the moment awareness became stronger than attachment. And perhaps that is the deepest transformation of all. The Sophia Empath does not become fearless because the world becomes safe. They become fearless because they finally understand that no relationship is worth losing themselves for. From that moment forward, every new relationship begins with one silent question. Does this connection allow me to remain who I truly am? If the answer is no, they no longer stay long enough to be hurt the same way again. And perhaps this is where the Sophia Empath finally becomes untouchable. Not because they build higher walls, because they stop abandoning themselves to keep other people comfortable. Carl Jung believed that the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It quietly controls your choices from the background. For years, the Sophia Empath believed their shadow was hidden inside pain, inside betrayal, inside abandonment. But eventually, they discovered something far more unsettling. Their shadow was hidden inside their own need to be chosen, the need to be understood, the need to prove their worth through endless compassion. The unconscious belief that if they loved deeply enough, they would never be left. One by one, those illusions begin collapsing, not because life becomes kinder, because reality becomes clearer. The Sophia Empath begins noticing that the same people who once exhausted them have not changed at all. They still manipulate, still blame, still avoid responsibility, still rewrite history. The only thing that changed was access. People often think healing means changing everyone around you. It doesn't. Healing changes what you are willing to participate in. The emotional games continue. You simply stop playing. The manipulation continues. You simply stop responding. The guilt continues. You simply stop carrying it. That is why awareness feels almost invisible from the outside. Nothing dramatic happens. No final argument. No revenge. No announcement. Just quiet absence. The absence of unnecessary explanations. The absence of emotional chasing. The absence of self-betrayal. People don't always notice when you've become stronger. They notice when their old methods stop working. That is when they call you cold, selfish, different, but they are not describing your personality. They are describing the loss of their influence. The Sophia Empath understands this now. They no longer measure love by intensity. They measure it by consistency. They no longer measure trust by words. They measure it by repeated choices. And they no longer measure relationships by history. They measure them by reality. Because history explains where someone came from. Reality reveals who they continue choosing to be. And once the Sophia Empath begins living by reality instead of hope, the same emotional wounds can never find the same home again. And in the end, nothing changed more profoundly than the Sophia Empath themselves. The world remained the same. People still lied, still manipulated, still projected their wounds onto others, still searched for comfort instead of truth. Human nature did not suddenly become kinder. The Sophia Empath simply stopped expecting it to be. Carl Jung believed that the highest form of consciousness is not escaping the darkness. It is seeing it clearly, without allowing it to control you. That is where the journey quietly ends, not with revenge, not with bitterness, not with emotional numbness, with clarity. The Sophia Empath finally understands that the greatest protection was never another person's promise. It was their own perception, the ability to believe reality before fantasy, patterns before promises, choices before words. Because words create hope, patterns create truth, and truth never asks to be believed. It simply repeats itself until someone is willing to see it. People often think the strongest person is the one who never cries, never breaks, never feels pain. But the strongest Sophia Empath is something entirely different. The one who still loves, without abandoning themselves, still forgives, without reopening closed doors, still believes in goodness, without becoming blind to evil. That balance is rare, almost frighteningly rare, because it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be guilted, it cannot be controlled through emotional chaos. The Sophia Empath no longer fears being alone, because they have discovered something loneliness could never take away: their relationship with themselves. And once that relationship becomes stronger than the need to be understood, an extraordinary freedom appears. Rejection no longer defines them. Silence no longer controls them. Abandonment no longer destroys them. Because none of those things can take away someone who never abandons themselves again. Perhaps that is why certain people quietly drift away. Not because the Sophia Empath became difficult to love, but because they became impossible to manipulate, and those are two very different things. The coldest truth about human nature may be this: the people who benefited from your unconsciousness will rarely celebrate your awakening, because your awakening quietly ends the version of you they learned to control. And that is why nothing and nobody will ever hurt the Sophia Empath in the same way again. Not because life stopped testing them, but because they finally stopped betraying the one person they could never afford to lose: themselves.